After a long career, Roman veterans would have much to show for it. Decades of distinguished service brought with it not just an extensive list of scars, but also an impressive array of awards. As with modern militaries, these ran the gauntlet from badges of personal distinction to unit-level accolades and campaign medals. All would have marked out a man who represented the best of the best the legions had to offer. So today, let's take a closer look at these Roman Medals of Honor.
The reenactment footage for this video was provided by the team at Imperium Romanum. They are a fantastic reenactment group based out of the actual Rhine frontier, who produce in-depth documentaries on both military and civilian life. Their content is highly educational and extremely well produced, with videos that put Hollywood to shame and are the best we've seen of this kind. Be sure to check out their YouTube channel linked in the description below and give them some support. So a huge motivator for me making these videos and this channel in general is to try and share my passion for Roman history with you guys, and that's why I'm super excited to actually share with you one of our community members, a grad student, has actually created his own Discord project that's meant for the community at large, and this is called the SPQR Scholar. So the SPQR Scholar is meant to foster open discussion between anyone from historians to archaeologists, classicists, teachers, students, and people like me who are just intrigued by the wonders of ancient Rome. And once you join it, you'll find all kinds of different channels dedicated to different topics ranging from ancient politics to culture, art, military campaigns, architecture, and more, all the stuff that's under the hood of history that I love personally. And to make this process easier, logging in, you'll actually be prompted to provide some information about yourself, like your areas of interest, your expertise, as well as the levels of involvement that you want to take part in. Because that's one of the cool things about this Discord setup is the SPQR Scholar has actually created a kind of mock Roman government and social system that you can engage in that allows you to rank up and to actually participate and run for different political offices. That to me is really, really cool, and it's what makes history tangible and exciting. So yeah, this is a really cool endeavor. I'm super happy to support it, and we're going to be linking it down below. I'm sure the creator will be down in the comments to answer more questions. If not, go and head on over to the Discord and check out what it's like. But I can't thank him enough for creating this type of an environment that I would have killed to have growing up in just a few years ago, and I'm happy it's come about now. So yeah, definitely check it out, and thank you again to the SPQR Scholar for being our sponsor for today's video. So thanks.
Awards for military achievements have long been a part of human history. From the triumphal monuments honoring the high-up generals to the myriad of accolades doled out to their lowly soldiers. Combat medals, specifically, have been found as far back as the Old Kingdom of Egypt over 4,000 years ago. And similar awards exist across many cultures and eras of the past. Thus it was that as the Roman military developed, it would be in a position to evolve upon this age-old practice. The early Romans took a huge number of their traditions from the surrounding peoples and tribes, namely the Celts, the Greeks, and the Etruscans. For instance, the Celts regularly used ornaments, such as torques, as signs of a warrior's status. The Greeks, meanwhile, erected tropaion, or monuments to victory, at their sites of battle. And the Etruscans may have contributed to key aspects of the iconic triumphal parade. By flipping through the history of Rome's formative years, we see many records of their gradual adoption. The most common examples are in the proudly catalogued deeds of brave soldiers and generals. Often these seem to be lifted right out of some Homeric epic where heroes duel one another in single combat, issuing challenges before armies and stripping the gear of vanquished foes. But while we might expect such incidents in the early years when the legions acted as mere war bands, there is ample evidence to suggest they persisted in the years of the Republic, when the army became more structured and disciplined. A prime example of this comes with the tale of Titus Manlius, a military tribune who, in 363 BC, answered the challenge of a mighty Gaul at the Battle of the Anio River. Here is how Livy puts it, quote, "The young man's friends armed him, He assumed the shield of a foot soldier, and to his side he buckled a Spanish sword, convenient for close fighting. Armed and armoured, they led him forth to the Gaul, who, in his glee, thrust his tongue out in derision. They then retired to their station, and the two armed men were left by themselves in the midst, like gladiators more than soldiers, and by no means evenly matched, to judge from outward show. One had a body extraordinary for its size and resplendent in a coat of shifting hues and armour painted and chased with gold. The other was of a middling stature for a soldier, and his arms were but indifferent to look at, being suitable but not ornate. When they had taken their ground between the two embattled armies, while the hearts of the surrounding multitude were suspended between hope and fear, the Gaul, whose huge bulk towered above the other, advanced his shield with the left arm to parry the attack of his oncoming enemy, and delivered a slashing stroke with his sword that made a mighty clatter but did no harm. The Roman, with the point of his weapon raised, struck up his adversary's shield with a blow from his own against its lower edge, and slipping in between the man's sword and his body, so close that no part of his own person was exposed, he gave one thrust and then immediately another, and gashing the groin and belly of his enemy, brought him headlong to the ground, where he lay stretched out over a monstrous space. To the body of his fallen foe, he offered no other indignity than to despoil it of one thing, a chain which, spattered with blood, he cast round his own neck. The Gauls were transfixed with fear and wonder, while the Romans, quitting their station, ran eagerly to meet their champion and brought him with praise to the dictator. Amidst the rude banter thrown out by the soldiers in a kind of verse, was heard the appellation of Torquatus, and thereafter this was given currency as an honoured surname, used even by descendants of the family. Over time, we see how such events gradually developed traditions meant to honour specific achievements in battle. The notable actions of a soldier, for instance, might earn him a talk, while a general who single-handedly defeated an opposing leader would be granted the spolia opima, or noble spoils of this foe. Marks of distinction could even be bestowed upon entire armies, as can be seen with the raising of commemorative trophies. As was common across the Mediterranean, these were fashioned from the armament of a defeated army and raised upon the site of the battle itself. By the imperial era, Rome had developed a long tradition of recognizing exemplary military service. But, as with many things, the transition from republic to empire brought with it a chance to officially formalize these concepts. Thus we see how practices that had organically arisen during the Republic were now standardized into a framework upon which even more awards were introduced. Let us now take a closer look at this system by examining what each decoration looked like and what it took to achieve it. As with modern militaries, these came in a variety of forms. We can begin with the individual awards for merit, which were typically reserved for citizen soldiers. One of the lesser and most common awards was the Hasta Pura. It appears to have been a silver pin depicting a headless spear. The Hasta Pura was originally awarded to a soldier the first time they struck down a foe in battle. In later years, this criteria seems to have been widened significantly to include defeating an enemy in a skirmish or even in the apprehension of bandits. Another lesser award was a small silver replica of a standard known as a vexillium. It is not explicitly stated what circumstances justified this award, though some have speculated it has something to do with the defense of the legionary standard in battle. Other common awards were the Armilii and Torquata. Both were of Celtic origin, with these iconic pieces of jewellery generally being worn by distinguished men of their warrior class. As we saw with the story of Titus Manlius, the Romans proved eager to co-opt such status symbols and soon embraced them wholeheartedly, with the absorption of Gaul and Britannia. Generally speaking, they served the same purpose as awards for feats of strength and valor. The armili were bracelets which came in grades of bronze, silver, and gold based on the status of the recipient and were typically issued in pairs. Distinguished soldiers could win multiple pairs over the course of their career. The torquata, meanwhile, were metal rings originally worn around the neck. In later tradition, however, the Romans issued smaller versions, which were usually hung above one's clavicles. These often featured alongside another class of award, the phalarii. They were large, round medals made of metal, precious material, and sometimes glass that were specifically made to be hung upon a harness that was draped over a soldier's chest. While not fully understood, they seem to have been given for a range of achievements. Some recognized individual bravery or leading a unit to a particular achievement on the battlefield. Others may have benchmarked one's years of service or for having participated in the important battles or campaigns of one commander or another. All soldiers seem to have been eligible for receiving such awards, but it was the officers who were honored with proudly wearing them into battle. Moving on, we can cover some of the awards that appear most tied to specific achievements. A group of these were meant to celebrate the defeat and despoiling of enemies in single combat. For infantrymen who achieved this feat, they were apparently awarded a cup of precious metals, while cavalrymen were awarded a decorated set of horse trappings. However, the most prestigious form of this award was known as the spolia opima, or noble spoils. It was reserved for generals who managed to slay an opposing commander in single combat. By tradition, they would strip their foe's armor, attach it to an oak trunk, and dedicate it in the shrine of Jupiter. Romulus, Rome's first king, was said to have been the first recipient of the award. Over the centuries, many would covet this ultimate prize, but only a handful of generals were officially recognized as having earned it. Here is how Suetonius describes the exploits of Drusus the Elder, who is believed to have been the fourth and final man to achieve this award. Quote, "He is, however, believed to have been no less eager for glory than he was republican in his views. For it is held that he sought to win not only his victories, but spolia opima from the enemy, often pursuing leaders of the Germans all over the field at great personal risk, and that he never concealed his intention of restoring the old form of government, whenever he might have the opportunity." Another group of awards for personal achievement were recognized by a series of crowns. These came in many forms for many deeds. The civic crown, or corona civica, which may have also been called the crown of the preserver, was a simple ring woven from oak leaves. It was awarded to a Roman who saved the life of another citizen. The crown was to be presented by the man who had been rescued, and from that point on, he would owe his savior a life debt, treating him as a father for the rest of his days. The grass crown, or corona graminea, was similarly rustic in nature, but was of far greater prestige. It could only be awarded by the acclamation of at least one legion, and was given to a commander whose actions were responsible for saving an entire Roman army. Pliny refers to it as the crown of the blockaded, highlighting the commander's responsibility for saving thousands of men from certain doom. It was made from grasses and grains that were collected from the very same battlefield, woven by representatives of the legion that had been saved, and presented by the same men to its recipient. The most famous example comes from Plutarch, who describes the actions of Fabius Maximus in the Second Punic War. At the time, Hannibal had defeated legion after legion, leading the Roman general to adopt the so-called Fabian strategy of shadowing the invader but avoiding contact. Others grew tired of this seemingly cowardly approach and attempted to return to the offensive. But when Marcus Minucius Rufus charged headlong with his army at the Carthaginian, he was promptly caught in a trap and surrounded. Seeing this, Fabius charged to the rescue and managed to save the beleaguered troops. Here is how Plutarch describes the aftermath. Quote, "When Fabius came forth, Minucius had the standards planted in front of him and addressed him with a loud voice as father, while his soldiers greeted the soldiers of Fabius as patrons, the name by which freedmen address those who have set them free. When quiet prevailed, Minucius said, 'Dictator, you have on this day won 2 victories, one over Hannibal through your valor, and one over your colleague through your wisdom and kindness. By the first, you saved our lives, and by the second, you taught us a great lesson, vanquished as we were by our enemy to our shame, and by you to our honor and safety. I call you by the excellent name of Father, because there is no more honorable name which I can use, and yet a father's kindness is not so great as this kindness bestowed by you. My father did beget me, while to you I owe not only my own salvation, but also that of all these men of mine.' So saying, he embraced Fabius and kissed him, and the soldiers on both sides in like manner embraced and kissed each other, so that the camp was filled with joy and tears of rejoicing. Yet, during the imperial era, it seems that the awarding of these grass crowns brought with them too much prestige, and thus their use was monopolized by the emperors who received them as a matter of course. One of the crowns which remained unrestricted was the gold crown, or corona aurea. Details are lacking, but it seems to have been awarded to both centurions and senior officers for killing an enemy in single combat and holding the ground to the end of the battle. Another noteworthy award for infantrymen was the Crown of Walls, or Corona Moralis, which was a golden circle in the form of a battlement. It was awarded to the first man to scale the walls when storming an enemy town or fortress. The Corona Moralis was a highly coveted decoration, though, as you might imagine, it was accompanied by an exceptionally high casualty rate. Yet, despite the risks, it proved an incredibly strong motivator for proud Roman soldiers. There are even records of different units coming to blows over whose man reached the top first. In at least one of these instances, during the sacking of Nova Carthago, Scipio Africanus declared that they had both reached the top at the same time, and thus both would receive the award. A variant of this award was the Camp Crown, or Corona Castrensis, which replaced the golden battlements with palisades. As might be guessed, it was meant to honor the first man who penetrated an enemy camp or field fortification in combat. Such a feat was likely accompanied with similarly high risks, though perhaps to a lesser extent than the storming of a fortified city. Another award to mention will be the Naval Crown, or Corona Navalis, which was a gold circlet adorned with the prows of ships. This award was given to the first man who boarded an enemy ship during a naval engagement. The medal could also apparently be given to triumphal naval commanders, as was the case with Agrippa for his role in the Battle of Actium. So far, we have mainly focused on the vast number of awards which might be granted to individuals. However, there were many which were given to units. Often these came in the form of honorific titles that would be added to the name of a particular group. This was especially popular for auxiliary units, where mostly non-citizen soldiers were otherwise barred from receiving most of the awards we previously mentioned. In this way, honored units could accumulate quite long official names, as with the case of the Cohors Unum Britonum Miliaria Ulpia Torquata Pia Pidelis Civium Romanorum. Awards to units could also come in physical form, with all manner of decorations which could be attached to their banner. Legions were particularly proud of these trophies and revered them as hallowed marks of their lineage, which could often be traced back over centuries. Beyond everything we have covered, there were likely many more types of awards within the Roman military which go unrecorded. With this in mind, let us now conclude this portion of the video and move on to discuss how these awards were actually granted. Such medals and accolades were awarded at the end of every campaign or military action by the unit's commanding officer. He would read out the names of each soldier and his achievements, giving each man his due before his peers. While this process could be a massive, laborious event stretching out over an entire day or more, it was nonetheless an exceptionally important duty of any good commander. Josephus records how the son of the emperor himself presided over one of these ceremonies after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Quote, calling up each by name, he applauded them as they came forward, no less exultant over their exploits than if they were his own. He then placed crowns of gold upon their heads, presented them with golden neck chains, little golden spears, and standards made of silver, and promoted each man to a higher rank. He further assigned to them, out of the spoils, silver and gold and raiments and other booty in abundance. But we might ask, how did the general even know who had done what in the chaos of battle? For this, he had to have a keen eye and rely on the reports of his subordinates. But catching every bit of the action was impossible. As a result, soldiers often took it upon themselves to act in ways that would be more easily noticed. It was supposedly for this reason that the velites of the Republic wore animal skins so that their officers could more easily tell them apart. In the more uniform years of the Empire, this may have proved more difficult, but it certainly did not stop commanders from identifying acts worth recognizing. For instance, Caesar loved to portray himself as being particularly capable at spotting these valorous men. Perhaps the most famous soldiers thus recognized were Titus Pullo and Lucius Vorenus. While HBO's Rome shares an entirely fictional account of these two men, Caesar's commentaries describe them as two centurions who, despite their bitter rivalry, engaged in acts of heroism to save each other's life on multiple occasions. One important aspect of these ceremonies, of course, was the generous cash that would accompany the award. This money would be a welcome supplement to the otherwise unimpressive salary that a soldier might earn. Interestingly enough, though, it seems that soldiers often placed more weight upon the medal itself than they did on the accompanying bonus pay. With regards to displaying awards, most soldiers would probably not have worn their medals on a regular basis. Not only was an average infantryman relatively unlikely to be adorned with a huge number of medals, even if they were, carrying these about in combat would have been quite heavy and cumbersome. For a common soldier, this extra weight was best left in camp. For parades, though, soldiers were keen to have their valor on full display and carried their polished medals atop freshly cleaned clothes and armor for full effect. Centurions, on the other hand, are thought to have worn their harness at all times if possible. They would often be the most decorated members of the legion, giving them the gravitas that they might need to keep men under control. That authority would extend to battlefield utility as well, making them distinct in a potentially chaotic situation. Unlike the common soldier, they were less likely to do manual labor, carry heavy loads, or need to move lightly for a scouting mission. As a result, weight was less of a consideration for them than the need to be distinct. It seems that soldiers who earned such military honors would proudly display them throughout their lives. Veterans who had long since retired and even their descendants seem to have preserved these memorabilia in their homes as symbols of great personal and familial pride. Such honors would even accompany them in death. The gravestones of soldiers are prime examples of this. Rich men spared no expense in commissioning a relief of them wearing their awards in full regalia, while poor men generally ensured that their epitaph would at least include a detailed description of their achievements. In this way did Rome's medals of honor create a lasting legacy which inspired countless generations of men to devote themselves in service to the glory of Rome. Stay tuned as we continue our series on the career of a Roman soldier. Let us know what topics you'd like to see us cover next, and be sure to head over to Imperium Romanum's channel where you can catch more of their awesome reenactment videos. A big thanks is also owed to our patrons for funding the channel. Consider joining to vote in polls, to catch script previews, and to download all our art. And finally, a shout-out is needed for the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.